Perhaps you've heard this story about 2 summers ago in a parking lot in Oregon at a Target Supercenter. Some guys were asked to come out and treat some linden trees for aphids because the aphids were dropping honeydew on cars and the trees were covered with sooty mold. And of course, this is a busy parking lot, so they had to show up early in the morning to spray the trees before the customers arrived. And they didn't notice, because it was still dark out, that these trees were in bloom. And so they sprayed the trees. They were in bloom. And in fact, they were visited then that morning by a lot of bumblebees. And by the time the customers began to arrive, just an hour or two later, they were greeted with the sight of 50,000 dead and dying bumblebees writhing in agony on the asphalt. And somebody got on a cell phone and called the Oregon Department of Agriculture officers. And then the endangered species conservation biologists arrived. And of course, everybody's looking up in the trees, and this was obviously not a good thing. And then it hit the local news, and she looks really concerned. It's the wrong kind of bees in this picture here, but you know, obviously this was pretty bad PR for the company. And the company was then required to go back and tint all of the trees, which would have been very expensive, I'm sure. And there were dozens of trees. The various tree hugger groups showed up, picketing, dressed in bee suits and so on. You can see all the tented trees here. This hit the national news. This is from the Xerces Society, the worst, largest documented bumblebee death in the western U.S. It was heartbreaking to watch, and I'm sure it was. I don't mean to belittle this at all. It hit the local news, resulted in pesticide fines and violations. It resulted in loss of license of the applicators, and hit the national news, ABC News. It even went and was in the London Times and overseas as well. And this has resulted in some bans on the indic insecticides in the western United States, just as one incident. And certainly a black eye for the whole green industry, the whole green industry. The sad thing about this is that the whole thing could have been avoided if these clowns had just read the label. And the label, although in sort of fine print, said, don't apply this pesticide to or allow it to drift on blooming crops or weeds if bees are going to visit the area. But again, the application was made in the semi-dark, and they just missed this. We can't afford very more incidents like this if we're going to retain some of the most important insecticides that the green industry relies upon. And certainly, this is an issue that has become far more acute for growers everywhere. Why all this attention on bees? Why are people swarming Home Depot and Lowe's and demanding that they stop selling these products on their shelves? Why swarm the EPA? What about this gardeners beware thing where people were being told that their garden plants that they buy at the garden center might be dangerous for bees? It's gotten pretty crazy out there. And what challenges does this pose for our green industry, the landscape industries, the golf industry, growers and garden centers, homeowners, and for private citizens? And I'm going to spend at least half of my talk trying to convince you that this is a teachable moment that also provides a lot of opportunities for the green industry companies that are astute enough to do something about this, and they can set themselves apart through their environmental stewardship and their awareness of how to mitigate some of these problems. I think it provides a lot of opportunities. So perhaps you saw the Time magazine cover, A World Without Bees. I think that's a little dire. I don't think we're facing a world without bees by any means. But bee populations are declining for a number of reasons. And as educators, I want to try to perhaps provide some background on why this is the case, because I know you're getting a lot of questions about this kind of thing, just like I am. Well, the USDA estimates that honeybee colony losses from all causes have been averaging about 30% annually since 2006. And that's about twice as high as it ought to be. I think they accept about 15% loss. And this is a fact, that honeybee losses are up. And it's not just honeybees, it's native bees as well. Why do we care about bees? I mean, who gives a rip about bees? Bee pollination services to agriculture, of course, are valued at a very large amount of money. Some people say 20 billion. I've seen the figure 30 billion. But regardless of that, there's a lot of things that would be off the menu if it wasn't for bees. So the value of bees to American agriculture is enormous, particularly honeybees. The California almond industry alone, one crop, requires use of almost 1.5 million colonies of bees to pollinate that crop per year. Now, if you look at that picture, it doesn't really show the monoculture of almond trees, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of almond trees, and there simply aren't enough native bees around to get the job done. So bees are shipped in and rented to the growers, and then the bees are shipped to another place where they would do the same thing. All of these crops would be off the menu if it wasn't for bees, and there are many more besides these. There was an interesting market basket survey done by the Whole Foods Market. Maybe you saw that on the website for Whole Foods about World Without Bees, but they showed what their shelves would look like with bees, and of course they're full of produce, and then without bees, and most of that stuff was gone. And then they showed their dairy counter, which was really interesting, because all the yogurts and things that have fruit in them would also be gone if we didn't have these bees. Now, it's not just big ag. Why conserve pollinators in our backyards, in our gardens? Well, obviously we need bees to buzz pollinate tomatoes and things like that. But we shouldn't forget that if we enjoy holly berries at Christmas time, if we enjoy the colorful fruit on our crab apples, currant berries, all sorts of things, the bees pollinate the plants that provide the fruits that support the urban wildlife. Okay, and I know the birds in my backyard love my holly berries once they turn red. Most people, when they think about bees, they think about honeybees. And we need to remember that honeybees are not native to North America. They're of European origin. They were brought here with the early colonists. I don't know if they brought bees on the Mayflower, but it wasn't long after that. And we can see some of the old pictures of the primitive beehives here. Besides honeybees, though, in North America, we have at least 4,000 species of wild native bees that provide important pollination services. And many of these bees are particularly important for pollinating some of our native wildflowers, many of our wild plants, where we don't have concentrations of honeybees to do it. Many of our wildflowers in the spring, for example, pollinated by wild native bees. Some of the ones you're probably familiar with, bumblebees. Everybody loves bumblebees. Very important pollinators, mostly native. Orchard mason and leafcutter bees are some. Sweat bees, these pretty little green bees that are actually very important in pollinating lots of trees and shrubs. Mining bees, which are active usually in the early spring, and they pollinate many of our things like flowering crab apples and so on, as well as many wild plants that support native biodiversity. Now, what I find when I talk to folks about bees and wasps is that a lot of people don't realize that bees and wasps are not the same. You say, oh, a bee-friendly plant. And they say, oh, I don't like bees. I don't want a bee-friendly plant. Bees sting you. They're nasty. You know, they don't like bees. They're not the same thing. And we need to educate people about the differences. Bees feed their young on pollen and nectar. Okay, so their biology is intimately tied to flowers. They have to visit flowers in order to raise their young. Bees have branched hairs. Whoops. Bees have branched hairs on their bodies, like little Christmas trees, like little feathers that catch the pollen. And then they comb the pollen off these hairs, and they have these little baskets on their hind legs, at least many bees do, bumblebees and honeybees. So they carry a little pollen ball like a a running back, a fullback carries a football under his arm, right? So they have modifications for carrying pollen. Here we are feeding the larvae, and this is pollen in the nest of a mason bee, like a blue orchard bee. And you can see the pollen here and the larvae feeding on the pollen. Wasps are different, though. Wasps are bold, like some of us guys. Or they have sparse hairs that are just straight. And they're not very well suited for trapping or carrying pollen. And wasps feed their young on meat. Okay, wasps are carnivores. They catch caterpillars and other small insects. They bring them back to the nest. They chop them up with their jaws like a Japanese sushi chef, and then they feed them to their larvae. Now, yeah, we get wasps to our Coke, and we get wasps to our watermelon and so on, but they're stopping by for an energy drink. Okay, they're not going to bring that back and feed it to their young. That's the Gatorade as they're going about their day. Okay. By the way, Diet Coke is much less attractive. They can tell the difference between Diet Coke and regular Coke. So if you're bothered by Yellow Jackets at a football game in the fall, bring diet drinks. They don't like the saccharin and the other artificial sweeteners. Okay, bees are docile. Okay, you can pick up bees. You can go to a plant and pet bumblebees on their back if you like. They're furry and cute. And they won't sting you unless the hive is threatened. And native bees will rarely sting. So they're not aggressive in the least. You might say they're defensive. If something goes and tries to destroy their home, they'll defend it. But they're not going to come after you. And, you know, when they're on a plant pollinating, they're very single-minded about what they're doing. Most of the bee stings that people claim in urban settings are, in fact, wasps, yellow jackets in particular. Now, all these yellow jacket species are invasive. They're not native. Go ahead and nuke them. I don't care. I hate yellow jackets, too. Okay? So we don't need to be too concerned about conserving the yellow jackets, okay? I don't have any problem with somebody squirting some 5% 7 dust down a yellow jacket burrow if they want to. Okay, and I've done that too. But save the bees. Why are bee populations declining? Okay, it's not cell phone towers and stuff like that. There are a number of reasons. You've heard of CCD, I'm sure, colony collapse disorder, and this is the one that's in the news all the time because honeybees are commercial bees. Beginning in 2006, beekeepers began to observe a sudden loss of hives all over the United States and also in Europe and other areas. The workers would go out and simply not come back. The workers would go out for their day, bring their briefcase, fly out, and they would never return. And they would leave the queen and the immature bees in the colony basically to starve to death. Okay? Disappearing worker bees, colony collapse disorder, and all kinds of crazy theories were proposed for what's going on. This has been extensively studied by some very, very good scientists, many scientists. And the consensus of the USDA and other people who know is that CCD is a syndrome caused by a number of different factors working in combination. And I want to talk about these just briefly. Diseases, parasites, management stress, and environmental stress. It's not one thing, okay? So one of the things that correlates most highly with colony collapse disorder in honeybees are these varroa mites. You've heard of varroa mites? Yeah, big deal. These are like vampire mites, parasitic mites that settle on the backs of the larvae, the pupae, and the adult bees and suck their blood. And this poor bee's got about 5 or 6 of them on its back, and this one's clearly got 5, and that's not doing them any good. So if you look at the factors, you find colonies that have collapsed from CCD. Varroa mites are the #1 thing that's correlated with colony collapse disorder, not pesticides, varroa mites. It's a big problem. If you don't believe it, you know, imagine something the size of a dinner plate on your back, sucking your blood all day long. Now put 5 of those suckers on your back. Okay, that's not cool. Okay. Now, the varroa mites also transmit certain diseases, and they weaken the bees that make the bees susceptible to other diseases. So one of the diseases that bees are suffering from are these exotic viruses that are introduced viruses. Various ones, there's one called deformed wing virus. When the bees have the varroa mites and they're otherwise stressed, they're less able to fight off the disease, just like we are. Here's one called Nosema fungus that causes the dysentery in bees. So you can see all the poop here from the bees, the dysentery, the diarrhea. So we have an interaction between the mites and these exotic diseases. Now, this is a really interesting one. Guys, who knows what colostrum is? Yeah? Okay, first milk, right? A woman has a baby and the first milk, very high in nutrients and antibiotics. It's really good for a baby, right? It boosts baby's immune system. Well, what the beekeepers are doing is they're replacing more, taking more and more of the honey because they're losing more and more of their colonies, and they're replacing it with high fructose corn syrup. And it turns out that honey has a colostrum effect for baby bees. It has full of antibodies and nutrients and things that boost the baby bee's immune system. You give them high fructose corn syrup, it's like feeding your baby Gatorade or feeding your baby, Coke. This is bad. This is good. Real honey boosts baby's immune system. This has been shown scientifically in very good scientific work. So this little kid got it right. You get more bees with honey, with real honey. But this is another stress factor. Okay, travel stress. We've all been here before. Bees have travel stress too, and what's happening is that commercial honeybee colonies are being trucked all over the United States for commercial pollination. So if, we're not talking about people that keep bees to make beeswax candles or a little backyard honey. That's hobby beekeeping. Commercial beekeeping, the money is in commercial pollination. So the bees are put on trucks where they're crowded together. They've already got some diseases, and they're interacting. The mites can crawl from colony to colony, okay? And then they're being moved all over, so they don't know if it's night or day. And they're shipped up to Michigan to do commercial apples, and then down to Florida to do, citrus, and then out to the West Coast to do almonds, and up to Washington State. And this is very stressful for bees. And then, of course, there's this, habitat loss. In Lexington, this is what Lexington is becoming, unfortunately, at least in the city limits. And a lot of these bees, especially the native bees, they require more than just flowers. They need nesting sites. They nest in the soil, or they nest in hollow stems or hollow trees. And with the loss of the habitat, we see a decline in many kinds of bees. And then I don't want to discount some of these other things. Environmental stressors are monocultures. There's a cornfield out in Indiana or somewhere. First of all, corn's lousy for bees anyway. It's, it only, and then of course, once that monoculture blooms a single time, there's nothing left for miles around for the bees to use for the rest of the year. Often these monocultures have less varied food, less nutritious pollen and nectar, and it's not available throughout the growing season the way a meadow would be, okay? And then we don't want to discount accidental or chronic exposure to pesticides, because that happens too, as we saw with that Oregon bee kill. Okay, so this is basically the picture for CCD in a nutshell. It's a syndrome, a perfect storm facing pollinators of parasitic mites, diseases, habitat loss, stressful management, and sometimes acute and chronic exposure to pesticides. That's not the way the public perceives it, though. The consensus is that no single factor or specific combination is the cause for declining bee populations, and although insecticide exposure can hurt bees, it's not the main driver of bee decline. The person that sprays your lawn for grubs is not the reason why bees are declining. Okay, emerald ash borer treatments are not the reason why bees are declining nationally. But on the other hand, they could put a hurt on bees in a local setting and obviously be a black eye for the industry. So it's an interacting thing, as you can see here. One stress can increase bees' vulnerability to others. Diseases can increase vulnerability to pesticides. Sublethal pesticides can increase vulnerability to the diseases and so on. So, CCD, it's kind of like having a concussion or a really bad case of the flu. You've got varroa mites and diseases and stressful management and habitat loss. And if the bees are, nurtured through all this, you might be able to bring them back. But, if you've got a concussion and you're resting comfortably and somebody comes into your hotel room and starts kicking you in the head, it's going to be a lot harder to recover. And the insecticide exposures that can occur are sort of that kick in the head. They're not the primary cause, but they can be enough to kick it over the edge. Okay, that's, again, not the way the public sees it. The public wants easy answers. They want easy answers. And it's very easy. Look at this one. It's no longer a mystery. We know, underlined, what's killing the bees. They're being poisoned by neonicotinoid insecticide. Well, yeah, that can be a factor, but it's not the primary reason. Tell the EPA to ban these things. Right? Now, this activism, now I'll get into the politics a little bit. This activism is nothing new. There have been groups that have, been attempting to ban all insecticides in urban landscape settings for a long, long time. The focus used to be on things like children's health, the alarmist stuff. But the bees have become a new driver for the pesticide politics. Now, as you'll see as I go on, I'm not saying that insecticides don't hurt bees, because many of them can hurt bees. But the political situation has gotten to be a huge driver where it's more important that we have integrated pollinator management than to protect an ash tree, which is kind of insane. Okay, the public is confused for a lot of reasons. Conflicting media stories. It's all over the place. This is all NBC News, all NBC News. Neonic pesticide linked to decline of birds and bees. Pesticides aren't the biggest factor, EPA says. EPA restricts use of pesticides. Neonic pesticides tied to crashing bee populations, 2 studies found. Study downplays neonicotinoid. You know, the average person who sees this night after night doesn't know what to think. Okay. And then there was the Friends of the Earth survey. Have you heard of this one? Okay, this was politically a very damaging thing for the greenhouse industry, for the garden centers, and so on. The Friends of the Earth is a group of environmental activists, and I'm not going to knock them. They fight GMO crops, but they also lobby for some things that I personally believe in, like, to try to fight climate change. So, but one of the things that they did not long ago was a market basket survey. They went to garden centers at Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot and a few other stores, and they bought a bunch of plants that were on the shelf there at the big box garden centers, and they cut off the leaves and they cut off the whole flowers, sent them off to a lab, had them analyzed, and lo and behold, what did they find in the flowers? Traces of neonicotinoid insecticides. Now, we all know that just because a substance is present doesn't necessarily mean it's present in harmful amounts, okay? But nonetheless, they did find neonics in about half the samples that they analyzed. And then they put out these bulletins, gardeners beware, you may be unknowingly harming bees. You buy butterfly plants for your butterfly garden, you're actually killing the pollinators. And, this got out, the Organic Consumers Association got involved, and they swarmed via protest some of the big box stores in 5 cities, demanding that they stop selling neonic products and stop selling treated plants. Here, the people dressed up like bees here. And I'm sure they're good folks, too, that believe that they're doing the right thing. Now, the big box stores have caved to the political pressure. Home Depot is now requiring labels on plants treated by wholesale growers. Now, I'm sure they wanted like a dead bee, like Dave said, with X's in its eyes, but instead they ended up settling on a label that looks like this. And it says this plant has been protected from problematic aphids, whiteflies, beetles, and mealybugs, and other unwanted pests by neonicotinoids. Market basket surveys and other studies show that most people don't know what neonicotinoids are. They don't necessarily know that they're pesticides, but they know they don't want aphids, whiteflies, and so on. So most people don't see that as a dire warning, interestingly. But nonetheless, this is required of growers. Now, Lowe's has gone one step further. Lowe's has announced that they're going to phase out the sales of all the home products containing neonicotinoids, and that is going to be a big deal. And I think others will follow suit. Now, why do we care? Why should we try to maybe steward these products? Well, these are some of the products that industry professionals use that are neonicotinoids. Merit, Arena, Meridian, Safari, and then some of these combo products. We use them for grub control. They are our least expensive products for controlling grubs in sport fields and lawns and so on. Things like Merit or generic imidacloprid. We use them for important pests in the Northeast like annual bluegrass weevils. We use them for emerald ash borer. Okay, in fact, the only homeowner products where you can do your own emerald ash borer treatments are neonicotinoids, the systemic products. And they work. They work. Okay, so this is ash. I know you have a lot of problems with EAB around here, but this is treated and not treated with a neonicotinoid, and you know, you can save your ash trees. This is grub treatment, treated, not treated with imidacloprid. So these are powerful, very effective tools for the green industry. They're also important, effective for systemic control of things like lace bugs and leaf miners and aphids and some of the scale insects. Okay, so they are valuable if we can learn to use them in a way that doesn't pose an inordinate hazard to bees that might be coming by. They're often less hazardous than spraying. And, you know, I love this picture here. Dave, there's Sacramento, California, with this clown basically just spraying Talstar mist everywhere and no doubt dropping bees all over the place. And, you know, the industry hardly ever sprays big trees anymore in crowded urban settings. Rather, we've gone to systemic applications, which reduce the hazard to bystanders and drift and off-target movement of the pesticides. With homeowners, you know, we used to go out and spray the roses with carbaryl or whatever and kill all the beneficial insects. But we have all these systemic products now that homeowners can use to control various pests on their trees and shrubs. And some of those are valuable. I mean, we used to do this, and now you can just sprinkle a few granules around, part the mulch, put it back, water it in. And as far as the hazard to people and the hazard to non-target things, generally better, and it simplifies things as well. There's no triple rinsing sprayers and dumping it down the storm sewer, and what's that doing there? Okay, so that's why we would like to be able to find ways to retain the use of these important, powerful tools, but also acknowledge that if they're not used properly, you can harm bees. And although the scientific consensus is they're not the major driver, it doesn't mean that they're harmless. They are insecticides. And as we saw with the Oregon bee kill, there is the potential to really put a hurt on bees if you use these in a dumb way. Yeah. Yeah. They believe it is the neonics? Yeah. And you know, a lot of that I think is driven by big ag and the neonic treated seeds and all of that. You know, my focus admittedly is the home garden, the landscape, and so on. We're going to get back to beekeepers in a little bit, okay? Again, it is a factor, one of the factors, but it comes in about number 6 on the things that correlate with CCD. But there is a debate. You know, it's a very different setting in an urban landscape than when you have a commercial apiary next to enormous monocultures of plants that are being treated systemically with seeds and things like that. It's very much a debate. Right, yeah. Right. Absolutely, yeah. And again, the work I'm going to show you is focused more on the lawn, the landscape setting. As far as commercial apiaries next to large monocultures of canola or other soybeans or things that are seed treated, that's a whole nother debate, But also, there's a lot of evidence that it's not a primary driver. Okay, it's not. There's a lot of, but a lot of debate too. There's no consensus. Okay, yeah, it's over. Why are they still dying? Okay. Mm-hmm. The hobbyists. Let me show you the data from our work, and then we'll revisit that, okay? Because that's a really good point. And again, perception and reality are not necessarily the same thing, and I agree with you on the perception. Okay, absolutely. in my bee sampling out in Arboretum, I've had people stop and say to me, "Did you see the gardens, the survey, the market basket survey by that group?" And they said, you shouldn't buy plants from the garden center because they're all toxic, and we have to talk about that. So that is the perception. Now, again, I'm not going to downplay that there's no hazard. Bees can be potentially exposed to neonicotinoid insecticides both through contact or through systemic transference. And the real issue with the neonics is the fact that they're systemic, which is why we use them, okay, because they get us away from having to spray the canopies of tall trees and deal with all the drift issues. The potential is there. There's a lot of research that shows that neonicotinoid insecticides at high enough dosages will put the hurt on bees. There can be sublethal effects, things like homing behavior, foraging behavior, pollen collection, colony function. These are pretty sophisticated creatures. And, basically, with even very low exposures, they can act like they're stoned, and then they don't perform their functions, and this can mess them up, okay? So there's a lot of resistance, hundreds of papers now that show that these products have the potential to intoxicate bees. But most of that research has been done in lab settings, where they have fed the bees dosages in sugar water and so on, and then put them back into control settings. And the real issue is, what about exposure? How much are they getting exposed to in the real world, and what can we do about it to reduce that exposure? So our recent studies have been focused on evaluating hazards in lawn and landscape settings, and then hopefully finding ways that the green industry can reduce the hazard through best management practices. Okay. A lot of the work I'll talk about in this section was work done by Jonathan Larson, who's now with Extension at University of Nebraska in a role very similar to yours. And kudos to Jonathan for some hard work here. Our model system, for the start at least, was clover in lawns. And at least in Lexington, almost all of our home lawns in my neighborhood have some clover in them. Very hard to get rid of it all. We're not sure we really want to. And it's not uncommon for lawn care applicators to show up in the spring and treat lawns that have clover on them with grub treatments. And homeowners do that too. We've worked with bumblebees because bumblebees are much cheaper to work with than honeybees and easier. And they're also early spring pollinators that visit clover in lawns. Again, these are some pictures in my neighborhood of the white clover in lawns. And it also occurs on golf courses. Okay, so this is the fairway. There's no white clover there because we mow it so tight. But in the close rough, where they often overspray, we can certainly have clover there. So it could be a hazard. And again, we work with bumblebees. Why bumblebees? Bumblebees overwinter as a queen, a single queen hiding in a chipmunk burrow or somewhere like that. And then she starts her nest anew in the spring. So the queen is foraging in March and April, exactly the time we make grub treatments. She starts a little nest. She's out foraging for herself. She'll make a pollen ball, lay some eggs in that pollen ball. It's only about the size of a golf ball when she starts. And then she'll rear up a brood. And then once she has some daughters, if you will, some bees that she's reared up, they'll take over the nest duties, and or she'll stay and just lay eggs, and they'll take over the nest duties and also the foraging. So the queens should be very vulnerable early in the year. This is why we work with bumblebees. Worst case scenario. Now we compared two different products, a neonicotinoid, Arena, clothianidin, which is quite toxic to bees, and a new product, acelepryn, chlorantraniliprole. Dave talked about this. Two different chemistries. Our first year, we had commercial lawn care applicator come and make the apps. We supervised him, of course. Second year, we made our own applications. We would apply these products at label rates for grub control in May. And after the residues had been watered in and they had dried, we would set up these open bottom screen tents like you see here. And our treatment timing coincided with spring grub application. So, the lawn care applicator showing up or the homeowner's making a preventive spray. Okay? And then the commercial bee colonies arrived. You don't want to work with this clown who decides to open it up while you're standing next to him. you know, and so on. But this is what the colony looks like, okay? It's got a queen and about 20 workers, okay? So now we're taking those bee colonies and we're putting them into these open bottom tents and we're leaving them there for 6 days just to simulate the period between lawn mowings, okay? Lawn care app made on a Monday and you don't mow it until the following weekend, okay? And we let them forage for 6 days. Again, these have been watered in and the residues are well dry before the bees go in there. And Jonathan went out there and he counted bees, how many are out, and we could see right away that with the neonicotinoid insecticide, we've got sick bees that are clinging to the screen and not doing their thing, okay, because we've oversprayed the flowers. We've violated the label intentionally by spraying the clover. So here we can just see some forager counts after a day or two. Not very many bees out and about doing their thing where we sprayed the neonic. Here's the not sprayed Acelepryn. Everybody's happy, lying around doing their thing, okay? When we open the colonies to inspect them, partway through these experiments, the neonicotinoid insecticide really put a hurt on them. That's not surprising. It says right on the label, don't spray it on flowering plants. And we did, and it really it knocked these colonies back down pretty hard. Even in this worst case scenario where we sprayed the flowers, we saw no adverse effect from the new chemistry, Acelepryn. Okay? Now, we took other colonies exposed in the same way. After the 6-day exposure, we moved them to a safe site. And we used horse farms where they don't, you know, Secretariat's out there. Not anymore, Secretariat's dead, but, you know, American Pharoah's out there now. And they don't use pesticides for miles around. None of these horse farms will use any insecticide. So we left them out there for the rest of the summer. And Jonathan would go out there occasionally, every week, and he would weigh the colonies and inspect them. This is what grad students are for, you know. I bought him many, many bee suits, but they kept getting into his pants and things like that, which is not good if you're a guy. And what we saw was that the colonies that, it's not good if you're a gal either, what we saw was that the colonies that got that setback from that initial exposure to that simulated lawn application never recovered. So here is their weight gain, and they are recovering a little bit, but by the end of the summer, they never caught up. They never caught up. Here's the controls and the ones that were treated with Acelepryn. They're doing just great. They're like twice the size of the other ones by the end of the summer. Now, only the biggest bee colonies reproduce. You have to reach a critical mass for that bee colony to reproduce. And if it doesn't reproduce, it's a dead colony. So at the end of the summer, we evaluated colony health. And what we found was that the colonies that had been exposed to the neonic did not produce any new queens. Okay? They never reached the tip point where the colony was robust enough to do it. So that's bad. That's the original queen from the spring. The non-treated colonies and the Acelepryn-treated colonies reproduce normally. Lots of new queens that would go off and start colonies. So, yeah, we violated the label with a neonic in a simulated realistic lawn setting, and that's not good. Overspraying clover blooms with a neonic adversely affected foraging, colony vigor, and reproduction. Okay? The Acelepryn had no impact. That's good. Okay? It costs 4 times as much, right, Dave? That's what he said, about 4 times as much. But a progressive company might be able to say, okay, we're going to have to charge you $20 more for a grub treatment, but we use a product that won't harm the bees. Okay? And that could be a marketing tool. Put a bee on the brochure. We don't know what the other guys are spraying, but we use safe stuff. Will bees avoid sprayed flowers? That's a good question. So here's the world's thickest stand of clover. This is actually a rugby cricket field on our campus where a lot of international students play intramural sports. Lots and lots of clover. We sprayed plots here. We visited these plots and we counted the bees twice a day for a week. How many were out there foraging? And the answer is no. They don't avoid the sprayed flowers. Okay, just as many bees foraging there, although they might go home and be sick in the case of the neonic. This was an important study we did. Does mowing reduce the impact? What if we spray off the contaminated flowers? Do we get season-long bee control? We get season-long grub control from these products. Does it kill bees for the whole summer? Or can we mitigate the hazard? So we repeated these experiments. We mowed the turf to remove the directly sprayed flowers. Okay? And then we waited 10 days for the turf to grow back, and new clover opens, new clover blooms that hasn't been contaminated. And then we put new colonies of bees on these same plots 10 days later. Yes? Yeah, the question is how low does the mowing have to be to remove the flowers? In this case, it removed them. I think we were probably mowing at about 3 inches. This was in a fescue, okay, with a turf-type tall fescue. But it's a good point. Okay, so we replace new colonies after the turf had been mowed and new clover grows up. We're really testing for systemic effect here, okay? And what we found was no harmful effects, which was really surprising to me. But nonetheless, when we did the same experiments, after the turf had been mowed to remove the originally contaminated flowers, we did not see the impact on the bees. We confirmed this with residue analyses, and there's a long story with this, but just to show you the results, if we overspray the flowers, they're full of residues. That's not surprising. It's like a little cup that catches the residues. Okay? If we mow it, new flowers grow back. We analyze the nectar. The residues in the nectar are reduced by 99.4 to 99.8%. That's after a single mowing, and they continue to drop. Okay? So the residue analysis supports the reduced hazard. Spray versus granular. Here's another best management practice. Which would you think would be less toxic? The granular, and it is, in fact. So the same product, Merit, in a sprayable or granular formulation. To cut to the chase of a lot of work, the spray contaminates the flowers. We end up with sick bees. Okay? The granular treatment, unfortunately, most of our homeowner products are granular, falls off the flowers, gets watered into the ground, and we didn't see adverse effects in that study. So, what we're taking this information and using it is to educate green industry professionals, lawn care applicators, homeowners, that if they're going to treat for grubs, there are certain things they ought to do to safeguard the bees. Don't overspray flowering plants. That's a label violation. Okay? But it can happen. It's hard to control all those violets and all those dandelions and so on. So maybe you control your weeds. I mean, most lawn care companies have weed control. Do the weeds before you make your grub treatments. Eliminate the weeds with your herbicide. Or mow. Or use a bee-friendly product like a Celiprin. Or if you're going to use a neonicotinoid, make sure that the turf is mowed either soon before you make the app or soon after you make the app to remove any flower heads that might have been contaminated, or go with a granular formulation. Communicate with customers. These are best management practices that can reduce or eliminate the hazard. And I think Syngenta should be doing more. I mean, I know their product is expensive, but they should be doing more to promote the fact that it's a relatively bee-friendly product, and other work supports that too, because that can be a marketing point. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You'd almost have to mow it very soon afterward. And that's a really good point, because as we know, if you're the kind of person that has commercial lawn care, you're busy. And you're not going to come home and mow that lawn an hour after the person makes the application. So yeah. And a lot of our bumblebees and things we call them doorstep pollinators. They live in a chipmunk burrow, underneath the sidewalk or something, and they're foraging locally. So yes, you could put a hurt on your local bees if those residues are on there even for a day. It's a very good point. Mowing before, controlling the weeds with herbicides. I'm not a huge herbicide fan, but these are things that at least could be done. What I like is the idea of using less toxic products. And the price on that will come down. Other companies are developing intranilic diamides, and they'll have to bring the price down to be competitive. So, if we lose the neonics, we're going to lose some of our important grub control products for homeowners. A lot of the stuff that you buy at Lowe's and Home Depot contains neonicotinoids. But there are some options, okay? The GrubX, kudos to Scotts. They've put a Celiprin in their season-long grub treatment. And if a homeowner asks, what can I use to protect my lawn from grubs? And by the way, I got nailed by grubs last year, and then possums dug up my yard. I trapped a possum, like a 40-pound possum. It was the world's biggest possum. And my yard looks terrible right now, but I'm putting in a clover lawn next spring. But anyway, this is a product that's bee-friendly. And, of course, there's Dialox, which is a short-term curative product. This will kill bees dead in a doornail, too, but at least it's short residual, and it's not systemic. Okay. Now, we're repeating a lot of this work with different plant species, especially the woody plants, to get at what Dave was saying. You got a good question, should we not use these things on woody plants? We're working with 3 different species representing sort of a scope of characteristics: Foster holly, winter king hawthorn, and summer sweet or clethra. And we're comparing 2 neonics, Merit and Safari, which have different characteristics, and 3 different timings: pre-bloom, which is typically March, post-bloom, July, and November, the preceding autumn. Okay? And I'm not going to be able to show you the results of this yet because we're expecting the residue analyses back in January. But the way we do this work is we have Potter's Sweatshop, all my grad students, and we hire their boyfriends and girlfriends, literally, people off the street. And it's a lot of work. We put the flowers into individual tubes like this. We spin them in a centrifuge. And after you do about 300 flowers, you end up with just a small amount of nectar. And then it's, close to $1,000 a sample to have it analyzed. So it's very tedious work. What we're hoping to do is to support tentative best management practices for woody ornamentals and things we can do, like pruning to remove flower buds. We were hard-pressed to find boxwoods with flowers on them in our landscapes on campus because everybody's pruning their boxwoods. And think about it. You take off the flower blossoms, bees are not going to come to boxwood. They don't come to boxwoods much anyway. The flies tend to like them more. We can treat for things like azalea lace bugs and scales and so on after bloom or in autumn. Okay, there's no need to treat for azalea lace bug in March. You could kill it just as dead with Safari in June after the plant blooms. And then match the product to the target. We know that imidacloprid Merit has a longer residual, but it's slower to get up into the plant. The Safari has got a shorter residual, but it's got a faster uptake. So if you say nuking azalea lace bug, wait until after bloom, and then nuke it with the fast product, Safari. And then the question is, will it be gone by the next year? And that's what we don't know yet. So hazard equals toxicity times exposure. That's toxicology 101. So, the rays of the sun are toxic. They can cause skin cancer. You can lay out in the sun all day and get sunburned, and that's high exposure and high hazard. Or you can put up an umbrella and you can stay out there all day, and you've got low exposure and low hazard. The real issue is, are there ways that professionals and homeowners can use these products to reduce the exposure of bees and therefore reduce the hazard? Okay, and that's what we're trying to develop here. The new bee advisory box, Dave already talked about this, but I think this was in direct response to that Oregon bee kill. They've made it much more prominent. So even in the dark, or even if you're blind and can't read, you'd still see this diamond here. So anyway, that's the neonic spiel. Now I want to talk about the opportunities, because I think this is a teachable moment that's a great opportunity for the green industry to market their environmental profile. And they shouldn't be threatened by this. They should jump on this as a teachable moment. Okay, there are lots of opportunities for golf courses and lawn care and nurseries and garden centers to promote bee-friendly plants. One of the projects we've been involved with is Operation Pollinator for golf courses. And this is my former grad student, Emily Dobbs. This work was funded by Syngenta and by the U.S. Golf Association. And golf courses are very interested in nature conservation right now because it's good for their image, and it also allows them to take out-of-play areas into sort of more of a fallow situation where they don't have to mow them, they don't have to water them, and don't have to fertilize them. So there's a strong trend for golf courses to become more of a nature sanctuary type thing. There's a program called Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary, for example. Have you heard of that, Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary? Golf courses, they put up a certain number of bird boxes and transition to more environmentally friendly products. and they put out pollinator habitat and bat boxes and some aquatic habitat. They can get certified as an Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary. It's very prestigious, and market surveys show that people are willing to pay more on an environmental golf course. And again, there's an economic driver for this too. By creating more out-of-play area, they don't have to mow it, fertilize it, and apply chemicals to it. So the maintenance required for quality play can be redirected to a smaller area, the fairways, the greens, and so on. Yeah. Yeah, that's not Audubon Society. That's a different organization. Yeah. Ah, I did not know that. Okay. Well, on the other hand, I know the Xerces Society has partnered with the United States Golf Association. Xerces Society is sort of the Audubon Society for insects. Okay, and I just got funded for an Operation Monarch butterfly on golf courses project. We're going to put, you know, like a couple hectares of milkweed habitat on every golf course in the eastern U.S. At least that's the dream. Okay, so yeah, the politics, I don't think the golf industry is evil. I think they're moving in the right direction. Okay, we have to work with these industries too, you know, rather than condemning them. I mean, this. Yeah, okay. But that's, yeah, but on a golf course. Okay, so this is Kearney Hills Golf Course in Lexington. And I mean, I'm telling you that it is all full of wildlife. I've seen red foxes out there, all kinds of bird life, lots and lots of monarch butterflies and milkweed. It's an amazing natural golf course. And this is what we're trying to get the industry to go to, rather than the Augusta National model, which, you know, I can't even imagine how much pesticide is used there. So the industry wants to do this because it's in their economic interest. I had the opportunity to go to Scotland this summer. It's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. Got my picture taken on the bridge 3 days before the British Open. But this is St. Andrews, and this is Carnoustie, and they are Operation Pollinator golf courses in Europe, and they bring in school kids to catch bees, and then they learn how to putt while they're waiting for their turn to catch bees and butterflies and things. So, you know, I know it's public relations, but that's important. This is Kearney Hills in Lexington. And if this wasn't this, it would probably be a subdivision or a strip mall or something like that. So I actually think this is a positive thing for urban nature conservation. In spite of what the Audubon Society says, there's a lot of birds on that golf course. Okay. With our Operation Pollinator work, the way we did it, we worked with 5 or 6 golf courses. We mowed, we applied herbicide to kill back the vegetation and the grass. We scarified, we hand seeded. We used a commercial mix of seeds from Applewood Seed Company. And they have a graduate level seed ecologist on staff who's terrific. Her name is Diane Wilson. I don't get a kickback for that or anything. But we told them what we wanted to do and where we lived and what the conditions were. And she set up a custom seed mix for us. And I know they're working with a lot of the people on the roadsides and the highway departments and so on to work with them on complying with some of the National Pollinator Protection Plan work now. So we went with them, and these are some of our plots that we set up. And we don't know what we're doing. I've never planted wildflowers before in my life, but we had fantastic success. This is the same area. See that tree? That's the same tree right there. And there was a turnover of blossoms during the growing season. We got 49 different pollinator species documented on the golf courses, 7 bumblebee species, including 3 that are threatened that we documented on the golf course plots. We came up with a recommended mix for golf courses. This might be different in Ohio, but we like the landscape coreopsis and bergamot, black-eyed Susans, New England asters, plains coreopsis, well, the coneflowers. And again, don't write all that down, but we had others, sunflowers and things in there. And so now we can recommend to our golf industry a great mix for pollinator conservation. And we got a lot of positive publicity out of this. And superintendents who've adopted this have received awards and things like that. As of spring 2015, and we published this in Golf Course Management, we were the first to do it in North America. There's 125 golf courses in 27 states that are doing Operation Pollinator. The CEO of Marriott Resorts came by and saw one of our sites when he was playing golf at a Marriott where we did this, and he said, "I like that." He saw the signage, and he's pledged to put Operation Pollinator on every resort golf course owned by Marriott in North America, and they've already done about 20 of them, I think. So, that's cool. Will it save the bees? Probably not, but it does increase environmental conservation awareness in people. And there is a website from Operation Pollinator that has guidelines for golf course superintendents on how to do this kind of thing. And the other thing is it gains those superintendents a little slack when somebody says, "I don't like the way that looks over there. You ought to spray that out. My golf ball went in there. I can't find it." They can say, "Well, yeah, but we're a nature sanctuary." Or maybe they can justify using a Celloprint, although it costs more, because they can argue with their Greens Committee that we're a nature sanctuary. Okay. Monarch butterflies, of course, almost to go on to the threatened or perhaps endangered species list because of the declining populations. An iconic